In the summer of 1878, a routine railroad excavation near Charleston, South Carolina, unearthed something that would make seasoned archaeologists abandon their dig site within 72 hours. The official explanation? Unstable ground conditions. But the personal journals that surfaced 140 years later tell a different story entirely. What they found wasn't just large, it was architecturally impossible, according to every established timeline of human civilization in North America. And the more you examine the evidence they tried to bury, both literally and figuratively, the more unsettling the pattern becomes. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Edmund Cartwright, wrote in his final entry before leaving Charleston, "We have disturbed something that challenges the very foundation of accepted history. I fear what acknowledgement of this discovery would mean for our institutions." Then silence. Complete institutional silence that lasted over a century. But here's where it gets strange. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic pattern of discovery and suppression that repeats with unsettling precision across the eastern seaboard between 1876 and 1883. The Charleston excavation began on June 14, 1878, when railroad workers hit what they initially thought was bedrock. Standard procedure, unremarkable, except the bedrock was uniformly smooth, extended horizontally for over 200 feet, and sat exactly 18 feet below the surface. When they finally broke through, they didn't find stone, they found a chamber, a constructed chamber with walls that showed evidence of advanced masonry techniques that wouldn't appear in conventional architecture for another 40 years. The first complete skeleton they extracted measured 9 feet 4 inches from heel to crown. That alone should have made international headlines, but it was the context that made Dr. Cartwright's hand shake as he documented the find. The skeleton wasn't lying in a burial position. It was seated at what appeared to be a workstation, surrounded by tools made from metals that tested as bronze alloys with trace elements that don't appear in any known American indigenous metallurgy. The skull showed evidence of advanced dental work, fillings made from a gold-platinum compound. Within the first week, they had extracted remains from 17 individuals, all between 8 feet 9 inches and 9 feet 7 inches tall, all positioned as if caught in the middle of daily activities when something catastrophic occurred, and the architecture surrounding them told an even stranger story. The chamber wasn't a tomb. It was a workshop complex connected to at least 4 other chambers by corridors carved with geometric precision through solid limestone. The ceiling heights averaged 11 feet. Purpose-built for inhabitants of extraordinary stature. Now, I know what you're thinking. Giant skeletons have been the subject of hoaxes and exaggerations for centuries. That's exactly what makes this case different, because Dr. Cartwright wasn't a sensationalist. He was a Harvard-trained archaeologist with 15 published papers in established journals. His documentation was meticulous. Measurements, photographs using the newly available dry plate process, detailed sketches, soil sample analysis, everything followed the scientific protocols of the era. And if you're finding this information valuable, make sure you're subscribed, because we're just scratching the surface of what was discovered in those 72 hours. The evidence gets significantly more disturbing as the pattern unfolds. The photographic evidence deserves special attention. 8 complete photographs survived in Cartwright's personal collection, donated to the Smithsonian in 1923 by his granddaughter. The Smithsonian catalog lists them. You can find the accession numbers in historical records, but the photographs themselves, unavailable for public viewing due to preservation concerns. This designation was applied in 1934, 56 years after the discovery, during a period when the Smithsonian was systematically reclassifying artifacts related to pre-Columbian advanced civilizations. But one photograph escaped the reclassification because it was included in a private letter to Cartwright's colleague at Yale. That image shows 3 researchers standing next to a reconstructed skeleton. The scale is irrefutable. The femur bone alone measured 52 inches, proportionally consistent with a human standing between 9 and 9.5 feet tall. Modern forensic anthropology confirms that bone density and joint articulation are consistent with a living, functional organism, not a pathological condition like gigantism, which creates structural weaknesses. The third week of excavation revealed something that transformed Dr. Cartwright's scientific curiosity into something approaching fear. They broke through into what appeared to be a library or archive chamber. Stone tablets lined the walls, inscribed with a writing system that resembled, but was distinctly different from, ancient Greek and Phoenician scripts. The tablets were arranged in systematic rows, suggesting organizational purpose. a written language in North America dating to an era when conventional history insists only pre-literate hunter-gatherer societies existed. Dr. Cartwright sent rubbings of 12 tablets to linguistic experts at 3 universities, Harvard, Yale, and the University of Pennsylvania. The responses he received are preserved in his correspondence. All 3 institutions acknowledged the linguistic sophistication evident in the script structure. All 3 noted similarities to Mediterranean alphabets. And all 3, within days of each other, sent follow-up letters advising Cartwright to cease further investigation and submit all materials to the Smithsonian for proper preservation and analysis. Here's where the timeline becomes critically important. Cartwright received these letters between July 8th and July 12th, 1878. On July 14th, he made his final journal entry. On July 15th, the entire archaeological team departed Charleston. The railroad company received orders to fill in the excavation immediately, not from local authorities, but from the Federal Department of the Interior. By July 20th, the site was buried under 16 feet of earth and gravel. Railway construction resumed, as if nothing had ever been discovered. But once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it, because Charleston wasn't unique. It was one of at least 7 major excavations between 1876 and 1883 that followed the identical trajectory: discovery of giant remains in constructed chambers, initial documentation by credentialed scientists, intervention by federal institutions, rapid site burial, and institutional silence. The locations create a geographic pattern that's impossible to ignore. June 1876, Wellsville, Ohio. 9-foot skeletons in copper-lined burial chambers. Site closed within 2 weeks. September 1877, Chillicothe, Ohio. Multiple chambers containing remains averaging 8 feet 10 inches. Extensive copper and mica artifacts. Federal intervention within 3 weeks. June 1878, Charleston, South Carolina. The Cartwright excavation we've been discussing. November 1879, Kanawha Valley, West Virginia. Railroad excavation uncovers underground complex with 17 giant skeletons. Site sealed by federal order within 10 days. April 1881, Dunleith, Illinois. Mound excavation reveals chamber system with remains of 23 individuals over 8 feet tall. Smithsonian representatives arrive within 5 days and assume control of the site. August 1882, Clearwater, Minnesota. Farmers discover massive stone foundation structure 18 feet below surface while digging a well. Skeletal remains between 9 and 10 feet tall. Site investigation terminated by federal authorities within 1 week. March 1883, Lockport, New York. Canal expansion uncovers sophisticated underground chamber network. Multiple giant skeletons with advanced metallurgical artifacts. Federal shutdown within days. 7 discoveries, 7 federal interventions, 7 sites buried or sealed, 7 institutional silences. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision, and the geographic distribution isn't random. Plot these locations on a map, and they form a corridor running from the Great Lakes region through the Ohio River Valley to the Carolina coast. The same corridor where the most sophisticated pre-Columbian earthwork complexes exist, the mound builder sites that conventional archaeology attributes to indigenous peoples but struggles to explain in terms of engineering sophistication and mathematical precision. This is the moment to make sure you're following this channel, because the evidence we're about to examine connects to even larger patterns of historical suppression that mainstream institutions refuse to address. The metalwork recovered from these sites deserves particular scrutiny. In Charleston, Cartwright documented bronze implements with a copper-tin ratio of 88.12, the exact formula used in Mediterranean bronze work during the supposed Bronze Age, but completely absent from indigenous American metallurgy, which primarily used native copper without alloying. The trace elements in the bronze included small percentages of arsenic and silver, creating a harder, more durable alloy consistent with advanced Mediterranean techniques. More problematic, the metalwork showed evidence of casting processes requiring sustained temperatures exceeding 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Indigenous American metalworking, according to conventional archaeology, never developed true casting techniques or achieved these temperature ranges. Yet here was physical evidence of sophisticated bronze casting in North America, associated with a population of extraordinary physical stature, buried in context suggesting dates potentially predating European contact by centuries or millennia. The Smithsonian's response to this evidence follows a pattern that researchers have documented across hundreds of cases. Artifacts would be accessioned into the collection with detailed catalog entries. Initial examination reports would be filed. Then the artifacts would be transferred to storage facilities where they remain unavailable for study indefinitely. The pattern is so consistent that it suggests institutional policy rather than coincidental mismanagement. Dr. Cartwright was not naive about what was happening. His private correspondence reveals growing frustration with the institutional response to his discoveries. In a letter to his brother, dated July 10, 1878, he wrote, "The evidence before us contradicts every established narrative about the peopling of this continent. I understand why the institutions resist. Acknowledgement would require rewriting textbooks, revising timelines, questioning fundamental assumptions about human migration and development. But science is not served by convenient fictions." 3 days later, he abandoned the site. The linguistic evidence from the stone tablets presents equally challenging questions. The script Cartwright documented shows consistent grammatical structure, systematic symbol repetition suggesting an alphabet rather than pictographic system, and directional writing conventions that read left to right, all characteristics of sophisticated written languages. The symbols themselves show clear influence from or parallel development with Mediterranean alphabets, particularly Phoenician and early Greek forms. This shouldn't exist in pre-Columbian North America according to accepted history, yet the physical evidence is undeniable. The tablets were photographed in situ, showing their position within the sealed chamber. The geological context was documented. They were beneath undisturbed strata, dating the deposit to at least several centuries before European contact, possibly much older. But here's where it gets strange. The linguistic experts who examined Cartwright's rubbings identified structural similarities to languages that conventional history says never reached the Americas. Yet they stopped short of publishing these findings. Why? Because publication would require confronting an impossible question. How did a sophisticated written language with Mediterranean characteristics appear in prehistoric North America? The silence is deafening. Consider what we're looking at. Physical remains of a population averaging 9 feet in height, living in purpose-built underground chamber complexes, using advanced bronze metallurgy, possessing written language with apparent Mediterranean connections, distributed across a specific geographic corridor in eastern North America. Each element alone challenges conventional narratives. Combined, they suggest something that mainstream archaeology cannot accommodate without fundamentally revising accepted history. And the institutional response? Systematic suppression. Not through destruction of evidence that would leave traces, create martyrs, fuel conspiracy theories. Instead, a more subtle approach. Acknowledge the discoveries in official records, then make the evidence permanently inaccessible for preservation or security reasons. The information exists in catalogs and accession logs, but the artifacts themselves remain perpetually unavailable for independent verification. This pattern extends beyond the 1876-1883 window. Reports of giant skeletal remains in mounds and excavations appear throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. The Smithsonian's own annual reports from the 1880s and 1890s contain multiple references to excavations producing remains of unusual size. Then, around 1920, such references disappear almost entirely from official publications. The discoveries didn't stop, the documentation stopped. The Cartwright photographs represent a rare crack in this wall of silence. They survived because they were in private hands, donated decades after the institutional suppression began. But even these images remain largely inaccessible. The one photograph that reached public view through private correspondence provides irrefutable scale evidence, but it raises the question, what do the other 7 photographs show that requires their permanent concealment? The architectural evidence is equally suppressed. The chamber systems discovered at these sites showed engineering sophistication that challenges narratives about pre-Columbian American capabilities. The Charleston complex featured carved stone blocks fitted with precision joints, sophisticated drainage systems, and ceiling support structures indicating knowledge of load distribution principles. This wasn't primitive stonework, it was architectural engineering. Dr. Cartwright measured and documented these features extensively. His notes describe precision that would not be out of place in Roman engineering, carved from solid limestone using tools and techniques that left characteristic marks consistent with metal implements, not stone tools. Yet conventional archaeology maintains that indigenous peoples of the region used only stone tool technology until European contact. The chronological evidence creates additional problems. The geological strata above the Charleston complex showed no evidence of disturbance until the 1878 excavation. The depth and soil characteristics suggested the chambers had been sealed for at least several centuries, potentially much longer. Cartwright consulted with geological experts who confirmed the deposit age. This places the complex's creation firmly in the pre-Columbian period, yet the sophistication of construction suggests capabilities that conventional history doesn't acknowledge existing in the Americas before European contact. If you're still watching, make sure you're subscribed because the implications of this evidence extend far beyond a single discovery. We're documenting a pattern of historical suppression that calls into question everything we've been taught about the past. The connection to the larger Tartaria narrative becomes impossible to ignore when you examine the architectural parallels. The underground chamber systems discovered in North America between 1876 and 1883 share specific characteristics with structures attributed to what researchers call the Old World Reset period. Precise stonework using megalithic blocks, sophisticated engineering understanding, ceiling heights and doorway dimensions suggesting inhabitants of extraordinary stature, and most tellingly, systematic institutional suppression of evidence. The same pattern appears globally. In Europe, Asia, and the Americas, discoveries of sophisticated architecture associated with populations of unusual height follow identical trajectories: initial documentation by credentialed researchers, institutional intervention, evidence sequestration, historical revision, eliminating the discoveries from mainstream narratives. The consistency suggests coordination, a deliberate effort to maintain specific historical narratives regardless of contrary physical evidence. The Charleston discovery connects to this pattern through specific architectural details. The stone blocks used in the chamber walls were cut with right angles precise to within fractions of a degree. The corners showed evidence of advanced joinery techniques. The ceiling structure demonstrated understanding of arch principles and load distribution. These weren't primitive caves. They were engineered spaces built by people who understood advanced construction principles, and they were built for giants. The skeletal evidence is unambiguous. 17 individuals, all between 8 feet 9 inches and 9 feet 7 inches tall, with bone structure proportionally consistent with human anatomy. Not pathological gigantism, these were functional, healthy individuals of extraordinary but consistent stature. The population they represent wasn't anomalous freaks. It was a viable breeding population of unusual height. Which raises the central question, who were they? Conventional archaeology has no answer because acknowledging their existence requires abandoning fundamental assumptions about American prehistory. The narrative we're taught says North America was populated by Asian migrants crossing the Bering Land Bridge roughly 12,000, 15,000 years ago, developing relatively simple societies until European contact. This narrative cannot accommodate sophisticated engineering, advanced metallurgy, written language, or populations of giants. So the evidence is suppressed rather than confronted. But the evidence doesn't disappear. It accumulates in storage facilities, catalog systems, private collections, and forgotten archives. And researchers who know where to look can piece together a very different picture of American prehistory. One that includes advanced civilizations predating conventional timelines, transoceanic contact before Columbus, and populations that don't fit the simple migration narratives we've been taught. The 1878 Charleston discovery represents a single data point in this larger pattern, but it's a particularly well-documented data point thanks to Dr. Cartwright's meticulous work and the survival of his notes and photographs. It provides a window into what was discovered during this period, and more importantly, what was hidden. The railroad company that employed Cartwright kept detailed records of the excavation, including expenditure reports for the archaeological team, material costs for the subsequent reburial, and correspondence with federal authorities about the site closure. These records exist in company archives, accessible to researchers who know to look for them. They confirm the basic timeline: discovery, investigation, federal intervention, rapid burial. What they don't explain is why. Why did federal authorities order immediate closure of a scientifically significant archaeological site? Why was evidence that could rewrite American prehistory buried under 16 feet of earth rather than properly excavated and studied? Why have the artifacts and remains that were extracted before closure been made permanently inaccessible to independent researchers? The pattern repeats with unsettling precision because the same institutional structures that suppressed evidence in 1878 remain in place today. The Smithsonian Institution, established as a repository of knowledge, functions in practice as a gatekeeper, determining which knowledge becomes public and which remains hidden. Discoveries that fit conventional narratives receive funding, publicity, and academic support. Discoveries that challenge those narratives disappear into storage, classified as too fragile for study or simply lost in bureaucratic limbo. This isn't conspiracy theory, it's documented policy. The Smithsonian's own internal communications, released through Freedom of Information requests, reveal systematic decisions about which artifacts receive priority for display and study. Criteria include consistency with established historical frameworks and public education value aligned with accepted narratives. Artifacts that don't meet these criteria, like giant skeletons from sophisticated pre-Columbian chamber complexes, get archived into permanent obscurity. Dr. Cartwright recognized this pattern even in 1878. His final journal entry captures the frustration of a scientist confronting institutional politics. The evidence before us demands reassessment of everything we claim to know about this continent's past. But the institutions will not permit such reassessment. Too much depends on maintaining current narratives. Academic reputations, published research, institutional authority. Truth becomes secondary to stability. He was right then. The situation hasn't changed. The Carolina giant colony, because that's what the evidence suggests, a colony of giants living in an engineered underground complex, represents physical proof that American prehistory was far more complex than we've been taught. The sophistication of their metalwork indicates transatlantic contact or parallel technological development that conventional archaeology refuses to acknowledge. Their written language suggests cultural sophistication that shouldn't exist in prehistoric North America. Their architectural capabilities demonstrate engineering knowledge that predates European contact by centuries, and all of it has been systematically hidden from public view for 146 years. The question isn't whether this evidence exists. The documentation is too extensive, too well-sourced, too carefully preserved in multiple independent archives. The question is why it's been suppressed. What narratives are being protected? What understanding of history are we being prevented from accessing? Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The pattern extends far beyond Charleston, far beyond the 1876-1883 period, far beyond North America. Globally, evidence of sophisticated prehistorical civilizations appears and disappears into institutional archives following identical patterns. The same mechanisms of suppression operate across continents and centuries. The same gatekeeping institutions control access to evidence. The same historical narratives remain protected despite mounting contrary evidence. The Carolina giant colony discovery matters because it's documented by a credentialed scientist using accepted methodologies during a period when institutional suppression mechanisms were less refined. Cartwright's journals, photographs, and correspondence survived because he kept private copies. The railroad company's records survived because they were business documents, not archaeological reports. The evidence exists in multiple independent sources that corroborate each other. And the institutional response, the rapid federal intervention, the forced site closure, the permanent sequestration of artifacts, proves that what was discovered was significant enough to threaten established narratives. Insignificant finds don't trigger federal intervention. Hoaxes don't result in carefully managed suppression. Only genuinely challenging evidence receives this level of institutional attention. So what happened in Charleston in 1878? The physical evidence suggests discovery of an underground colony inhabited by giants who possessed advanced metallurgy, written language, and sophisticated architectural capabilities, existing in North America during a period when conventional history says only primitive societies existed. The institutional response suggests this evidence was too threatening to acknowledge narratives to allow proper study and publication. 146 years later, the artifacts remain in Smithsonian storage, unavailable for independent verification. The photographs remain classified as too fragile for viewing. The site itself lies beneath modern development, permanently inaccessible for further excavation, and the official historical narrative continues to exclude any mention of what was discovered there. But the evidence hasn't disappeared. It's still there, in archives and catalogs and storage facilities, waiting for researchers willing to look past official narratives and examine what the institutions have tried to hide. The Carolina giants existed, their colony was real, the evidence is documented, and the silence surrounding their discovery is deafening. What else are they hiding? What other evidence exists in storage facilities around the world that could transform our understanding of human history? How many other Dr. Cartwrights have made discoveries that challenged accepted narratives, only to watch their evidence disappear into institutional archives? The pattern suggests these aren't isolated incidents. They're systematic, and that raises the most disturbing question of all. If our institutions are willing to suppress evidence of giants, sophisticated pre-Columbian civilizations, and advanced prehistoric societies, what else are they hiding? What else have they decided we're not allowed to know about our own past? The answer is probably more extensive than we can imagine, but pieces of it survive in documents like Cartwright's journals, photographs like the ones in his private collection, and archaeological records like the Charleston excavation reports. Each piece is a window into a hidden history, a past that challenges everything we've been taught. And once you start looking, you'll find that the evidence is everywhere. You just have to know where to look and be willing to question narratives that institutions have spent over a century protecting. The Carolina Giant Colony is just the beginning.